PRObrands is one of the biggest FMCG companies in Zimbabwe. The company has an extensive portfolio of over 15 consumer products, which include rice, beverages, detergents, canned products, pastas, and so many more. The company was founded by Nigel Philp in 2007, but the story starts all the way back in the 80s to a young Nigel Philp. Nigel's story begins at Peterhouse Schools, then Harper Adams University in the UK, which was an agricultural college where he would study agricultural marketing. This is where he would learn the key to his future success, product marketing. Fast forward to 1994, the Commercial Farmers Union had set up a commodities free market in Zimbabwe through the creation of the Zimbabwe Agriculture Commodity Exchange, or ZimAce. ZimAce was a platform through which farmers could sell their produce to brokers who would facilitate transactions with industry being companies such as Olivians, which needed soybeans, and National Foods, which needed maize. To join the ZimAce platform, one needed to pay $10,000 to buy a seat and a desk. Nigel, who was in the UK at that time, came back to Zimbabwe, and his father bought him a place at the ZimAce platform where he would become a broker trading in wheat and maize. Armed with a pickup truck, a computer, an answering machine, and 6 months of burn, he started the company called PRObrands. He sold 7 tons of ground nuts in his first 4 months, which gave him $2,500 in revenue, while he was burning $500 a month in expenses and overheads. Nigel would drive around farms in Mash Central, convincing farmers to sell their grain through him for a 1% commission. He would eventually build a database of over 250 farmers. In 1996, at just 25, Nigel met Kevin Fick, his future business partner. Kevin bought 50% of PRObrands for $80,000. With that money, Nigel bought shares in CFI Holdings, which turned his $80K into $100K when CFI went public and listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. Nigel would go on to buy the Mpuanga Silo Syndicate marketing rights for $500,000, which allowed him to have exclusive commodity marketing rights for 5 years. That was the turning point of PRObrands, because with that transaction came 20% of Zimbabwe's wheat, and at that time, Zimbabwe used to produce 70,000 tons a year. Suddenly, PRObrands joined the big boys of business, as they now controlled 20% of Zimbabwe's wheat. By the late 90s, PRObrands was moving 200 to 250,000 tons a year of commodities such as maize, wheat, and soya bean. It came as a shock to Nigel when Kevin suddenly wanted out of the business. So Nigel bought him out for $1 million, turning Kevin's initial $80K into a whopping $1 million. 3 months later, in 2000, Nigel would suffer a major setback in the business when Statutory Instrument 232A came out, which banned the trading of maize and wheat by private players. That would be the end of PRObrands. Nigel had to sell most of his assets, including their beautiful offices in Mount Pleasant Business Park. More trouble would brew for the company in 2000 when the third Chimurenga fast-track land reform program hit most of his clients, who now couldn't supply him with commodities. Despite these setbacks, Nigel's story didn't end there. His resilience paved the way for what would later become PRObrands, a company that would rise again. Stay tuned for the next chapter of his incredible story. In 2000, Nigel Philp hit rock bottom. After losing everything to Zimbabwe's economic storms, he found himself trapped in a cycle of despair. He had been hit 3 times, once by the government of Zimbabwe Statutory Instrument 232A, which banned trading of wheat and maize by private players, once by the fast-track land reform farm invasions, and once by currency devaluations. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was personal. He felt betrayed by the system. For a man who had once been at the top, the world now seemed like it was closing in. Every day, Nigel and his 4 friends gathered to vent their frustrations. The future seemed hopeless, until a chance encounter changed everything. One day, Nigel walked into an Avondale bookstore and he saw a guy signing books. The guy was an author and his name was Keith Meadows. Nigel bought a book and then Keith looked up at him and asked if he should sign anything inside the book. Nigel just told him to write anything. Keith Meadows, an author Nigel had never met, wrote a simple Latin phrase, illegitimi non carborundum, which translates to, "Don't let the bastards weigh you down." These words struck Nigel in a way nothing else had in months. It was a spark of hope, the first sign of light after months of darkness. Motivated by those words, Nigel made a decision. No more moaning, no more excuses. It was time to change the narrative. He sent one of his friends, Gordon, to go look for opportunity in Botswana, and he himself decided to go up north to look for opportunity in Zambia, a market he used to dominate. In Zambia, he met an Indian guy, Elmo, who he used to do business with, and who now ran a corn-soy blend factory in Zambia. Elmo asked Nigel how business was in Zim, and Nigel reverted back to moaning and complaining. Elmo sat down with Nigel and explained to him how he was looking at the situation wrong. "Take the emotion out of it," he told Nigel. "There is an opportunity. Are you telling me there is not going to be any food?" Elmo's words were a turning point. It was then that Elmo suggested Nigel start a corn-soy blend factory, a product used in food assistance programs to combat malnutrition. It was a risk, but a risk that could turn the tide for Nigel. Corn-soy blend is a pre-cooked mixture of corn, soybeans, and other ingredients that is often fortified with vitamins and minerals. It's used as a protein supplement in food assistance programs to help prevent and treat nutritional deficiencies. The success of this factory was highly dependent on if there ever was a famine in Zim. Nigel decided to take the bet, struck a partnership with the Zambian guy, launched a new company, and he built the factory in 2003. So Nigel, who was primarily trading in Zambia, started supplying NGOs in Zimbabwe such as Red Cross, World Food Programme, and Save the Children with the corn-soy blend porridge to feed undernourished and starving children in Zimbabwe. In 2004, Nigel also started working with another Zambian guy, Diego. Diego was running a soya bean crushing plant where he was producing cooking oil and exporting soya meal to South Africa. Nigel was responsible for running Diego's contract farming programs for raw materials and also making sure that they had raw materials so that whenever an NGO tender came up, they always had product to supply. The comeback was complete. But just as things started looking up, disaster struck again. Nigel and his partners lost 100,000 tons of maize, a loss worth millions of dollars. This time, however, they didn't collapse. Diego, his partner, had the funding to keep things going. One day, Nigel was reading a magazine and he came across a short article which predicted a wheat shortage in Zambia. A wheat shortage meant that there was a chance that prices of the crop would go up. Nigel decided to take this bet, and he took the article to Diego and then went on to convince him to buy most of Zambia's wheat crop from Zambian farmers. The Zambian Grain Board was offering wheat farmers a price of $320 per ton, and so Nigel decided to offer the farmers a price of $400 per ton to sweeten the deal. He had predicted that wheat prices would rise to $460 per ton, and if everything went according to plan, that would be a very sweet deal. They managed to scoop up 23,000 tons of wheat from the country's 120,000 tons, which was 20% of the crop in Zambia at the time, and this gave them massive leverage. This trade helped Nigel and Diego recover from their million-dollar loss and even make a nice profit. On the side, Nigel was still making the corn-soy blend and business was cyclical. They were heavily dependent on tenders from NGOs, and if there were no tenders, business was slow. One day, a guy Nigel was working with suggested to him that he should buy an expeller. A soybean expeller is a machine used to extract oil from soybeans. In 2006, Nigel decided to invest $100,000 in a soya bean expeller, which processed 1 ton of soya bean an hour. After a month, he had processed about 300 tons of soybean, and he went around trying to sell the soybean meal. Soybean meal is the solid byproduct left after extracting oil from soybeans and has many uses, primarily in animal feed and other industries. National Foods and Irving's turned his product down because it wasn't the right quality they were looking for. It had too much oil in it. Only one company, Agri-Foods, finally came around and bought the 300 tons, which they didn't end up paying for. Nigel was forced to buy another plant for another $100,000, and in 2007, that was the official birth of PROfeeds. Stay tuned for the next chapter of his incredible story. It's 2007, and a Zimbabwean entrepreneur named Nigel Philp faced a problem. No one wanted his stock feed, and the only customer who took it didn't want to pay for it. But with pure grit and a vision inspired by Richard Branson, he would go on to ignite a revolution. This is part 3 of the story of PRObrands, a tale of fire, courage, and an unbreakable spirit that reshaped Zimbabwe's food industry. After Agri-Foods had taken 300 tons from him but refused to pay the bill, Nigel met Nigel Launder, a gifted marketer and brand builder who had just left the corporate agency world to start his own creative agency. Nigel approached Launder with his vision, inspired by British billionaire entrepreneur Richard Branson, of transforming his business and creating a brand. He wanted to make stock feed, pack rice, and manufacture key FMCG products. And that year in 2007, Nigel invested $2,000 in a foot pedal sealing machine, planning to start selling packed FMCG products on the side. Nigel then assembled the original ProTrade team of 1994, which mostly consisted of young people in their 20s, and he set forth to build PRObrands. But in 2008, disaster struck. A fire completely destroyed the plant, threatening to derail everything he had worked for. But Nigel refused to give up. In September of 2009, he started again from scratch. The first month, business was slow. They only processed 6 tons of livestock feed, but Nigel's entrepreneurial drive and determination would soon pay off. Nigel reached out to David Irvine, the owner of Irvine's Chickens, a key player in the poultry industry, and he asked if he could set up a simple kiosk to sell his feed at one of Irvine's locations. David agreed, and soon the Nigel's feed was flying off the shelves. Encouraged by the success, Nigel asked for permission to open another shop at a busy location on 4th Street. And soon he was running 2 stores. But success wasn't always smooth sailing. One day, Nigel received a call from his brother, who was at a ProFeeds shop, reporting that riots had broken out. Customers were upset because their chickens were dying, and they blamed ProFeeds. Frustrated, Nigel reached out to David Irvine, who offered critical advice. "If you're going to sell feed to small-scale farmers, you've got to train them," he said. Taking this to heart, Nigel created simple, informative flyers teaching farmers how to properly raise chickens. It became part of the DNA of ProFeeds. Business boomed, and by 2010, Nigel expanded to 10 more stores, training 2,000 poultry farmers every quarter. ProFeeds was no longer just a feed supplier. It was an educational hub for farmers, a trusted partner in the agricultural community. Nigel made sure that at every ProFeed center, a trained agronomist or animal scientist was available on site. And when turnover hit $1 million, Nigel knew that PRObrands was on the brink of something huge. By 2012-2013, PRObrands had expanded its portfolio, getting into the dairy industry, processing fresh milk and cultured milk through the Masi and Sawa Sawa brands, as well as making juice through their Revive brand, and competing with major monopolies in the industry such as Mazoe and Dairy Board. The journey was not easy at all, and in 2012, PRObrands owed about $12 million in debt, mainly due to unforeseen circumstances such as being defrauded of millions of dollars. In 2013, Nigel was advised to get a financial advisory consultant who helped him generate some cash by selling half of PROfeeds to Ashram Investments, a subsidiary of InScore, whilst he kept the rest of the businesses which were unsellable. 2013 also saw the launch of PRObottlers, with the launch of Ballyhouse Crush and cordial drinks range. Following on from the success of these cordials, a carbonated soft drink range was introduced under the Fizzy brand. PROfeeds, on the other hand, invested about $6 million towards the construction of a new plant that helped the company achieve 110,000 tons by the end of 2015. By 2016, their dairy line was consuming 60,000 liters of milk a month, and the beverage line was doing 500,000 liters of beverages a month. In 2018, ProDairy was then spun off as a separate brand as part of the InScore family because of its success as a division within PRObrands. In 2019, InScore then acquired a 50% stake in PRObottlers. Currently, ProDairy consumes more than 2.5 million liters of milk a month, and the beverages line processes more than 15 million liters a month. ProFeed serves more than 89,000 customers a day, sells thousands of tons of livestock feed a week, controlling about 50% of the small-scale poultry market and 25% of the wider poultry market. ProFeeds has also just commissioned a state-of-the-art ProFeed center in Bulawayo. PRObrands Group's journey is a testament to the power of vision, hard work, and never giving up, no matter the odds. It's a story that continues to inspire entrepreneurs across Zimbabwe and beyond. Asked if there is any advice he can give young entrepreneurs in business, Nigel Philp says, "Don't buy one and sell it two, buy one and sell it 110."